everyone from the outside's looking, thinking like you've got it all together. It's all perfect. And you're just kind of dying inside, right? Like this is, I wanted to get into this to make coffee, and I'm looking all day, every day at P&Ls and legal statements. And it's just, we're doing all these things and none of them are checking the box. We're achieving these milestones and they don't really seem to matter. Then, heaven forbid, but then some stuff starts to go wrong, right? The whitewater kicks in with the complexity of the organization starts causing people to have problems. Our leaders aren't keeping up with the pace of growth of the organization. We don't have the ability or time in the day to go and fight all the fires anymore. So not only are we being disappointed by how it feels to lead this organization, we feel totally out of control and unable to keep it going.
Welcome to the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast on YouTube. I'm so glad you joined us. Hey, if you're here for the first time, subscribe, because if you're an entrepreneur, a founder, or a church planter, you need to listen, because we've got Scott Ritzheimer on. He talks about some of the mistakes that founders, people like you and me, make. I've planted a church. I've started companies. I am a serial starter. And we make mistakes. There's a certain personality type. We definitely bring strengths to the table, but also weaknesses. So we're going to talk about that on the podcast, and would love for you to leave a comment if it means something to you. And today's episode is brought to you by BELAY. Do you know that there are 5 positive changes that come from hiring a bookkeeper for your church, particularly if you're a planter? You didn't want to become an accountant. So BELAY is offering our listeners a free download of their resource, 5 ways a church bookkeeper can transform your day. Text my name, Carey, C-A-R-E-Y, to 55123 to claim this offer now. And we're approaching the end of year, and now is the time to get your giving strategy in place, not only to finish the year strong, but to prepare you for the next year ahead. So if you're trying to figure out how to take a discipleship approach toward increasing generosity in your church, I invite you to visit generis.com/kickstart. And now to today's episode. Well, Scott, I'm so glad to have you on the podcast. Welcome.
Carey, I'm excited to be here. Been looking forward to this all day, and I think it's going to be a great conversation.
Yeah, I think so. We have so many founders listening, or people who want to be founders, people who want to start things, whether that's really small, whether that's church planters, entrepreneurs, business leaders. But this is a crazy stat. So help me understand. You have helped about 20,000 businesses launch. How is that even possible? Because you're not 79.
No, anyone watching, you've got a slight disadvantage over people who are just listening, because I look like I'm about 14, and you're doing the math, and it's like, that's like 2,000 a year. How do you do that? And I kind of have to pinch myself as well. So I'm not 14, and I have had a wonderful chance to actually help around 20,000 organizations, me and my team. And we did a lot of that in the church and nonprofit space. We did a lot of that with for-profit businesses and just about everything in between, from hospitals to ferret rescues to, local service clubs, a lot of different kinds of organizations. And how do we do that? It was not some grand design or plan. I didn't go to school thinking I would start 20,000 organizations. I actually accidentally dropped out of high school. So there was no grand scheme behind all of this. It wasn't like I felt like I was destined to start organizations, but kind of even stumbled into the world of entrepreneurism. But we realized pretty early on that there was a need, particularly in the church community, and then expanded from there, a need for someone to come alongside and help in the early days. And so that's how I got into it. Again, we're helping start a whole bunch of organizations every year. And what happens after you do that for a little while, or about 5 years in, we started seeing a lot of them close, right? We were launching them, but they weren't succeeding. And a whole lot of them. And it got me thinking, at the same time, my business is growing and we're experiencing some growing pains. And it set me on this path of figuring out, why is it that in some ways, it's really hard to start an organization and get it off the ground. There's some really tough stats around that. But even the ones that make it, why is it that so many of them fail? Why is it that so many founders, whether they have success early on or not, why is it that early success doesn't necessarily guarantee later success. What is it that trips us up? And it started a whole journey for me. It was quite fascinating.
Well, I mean, you look at Silicon Valley, founders don't always make great CEOs, right? And I guess you probably have an entrepreneurial spirit. I mean, anybody who would try to MacGyver their GED that way and then go back to high school after leaving and all that stuff. Do you find that that's one of the patterns in startup people, entrepreneurs, church planters, is we make up our own ruls? For better or worse?
Absolutely. I think there's a certain degree to which you have to, right? So you look at so somewhere around 8 out of 10 new entrepreneurs and in many ways new churches, they're very much cut from the same cloth, right? Different way that it's expressed and different goals in many ways, shapes, and forms, but similar style. And the vast majority of them fail, right? It may fail on just, being conceptualized. It may fail once we start, may fail a couple of years in, may fail 15, 20 years in before we really ever gain traction. Some of us are just that stubborn. I've been there, I know. But starting something from nothing is not easy.
Yeah.
There's a whole lot of things that are a whole lot easier that can create a whole lot of success by whatever your standard of success might be, right? And if you can do any of those things, you probably should. So to answer your question, I think there has to be an element of, I'm going to do something that doesn't make sense, right? It genuinely doesn't make sense to start a business from nothing. And when you really boil it down, again, there's much easier ways. And so I think what that does is it attracts people who aren't afraid to break some rules, right? Who aren't afraid to see things through a different lens, who are bold enough and brave enough and to an extent ignorant enough to think that they can change their world or their piece of the world. And I love it, right? Oh, working with those people is just so exciting. It's so fun. And you're right. And I love this about your podcast in particular is that it is both worlds. It's not just a for-profit entrepreneur business leader thing. It's not just a nonprofit, founding pastor thing. It really is how we start organizations and ultimately has a really big role in how we scale them as well.
Well, that's what I think. I mean, I see so many similarities between that sort of startup entrepreneurial mindset in the church world, but also in the business world. And, wherever the application happens to be, it's the same DNA. It's the same cloth. It's the same fabric. Most founders start off as employees. You work at a gas station or you work at a restaurant or something like that. When you look at what goes into the person who eventually becomes a founder, a starter, an entrepreneur, what kind of employees do future founders tend to make? Like if you're, and I want to ask this question, if you're in an organization right now, you've got a bunch of young leaders, how do you spot the founder among the cast of characters that you've hired?
So there's a whole spectrum here from like just patently unemployable founders, right? The ones who I have a dear friend who actually describes himself that way. Had one job, coming out of college and has never worked for anybody else since. So there's that. But when you look at most, and I'll say successful founders, nonprofit world, business world, they actually tend to be high performers. They tend to be a little wild, a little crazy in many ways. But when you look at some of the stats on this, most of them are making about 150 to 180% of what others would make in their given role. Right. So if they're a salesperson, they tend to succeed as a salesperson. If they're, some kind of consultant or whatever it may be, they actually tend to be high performers. Now, this isn't of all people who start their own business. This is those who start their own business and succeed. So there are a significant number of founders who did succeed as employees. But here's the characteristic that I think really sets them apart. One is what a lot of people would mistake as a natural leadership gift. They'll say, hey, he's just a leader, right? There's this kind of feeling quality about it. I have a little bit of trouble with that because I think that there's actually, like our mutual friend Les McEwen talks about, there are 4 leadership styles, and it tends to kind of push us away from a couple of those. But that thing that most people would say, hey, they just have leadership on them, very good indication that they might have that founder DNA in them. Now, they could be an intrapreneur or an entrepreneur. There's a whole discussion around that, but that's one of them. When you're looking at it from the other side of that equation, so someone sitting there is thinking, hey, maybe I have founder DNA. There's a couple things that I encourage folks to think about. The first one is there's basically not a single founder who's gone out, made the leap, and succeeded who hasn't done it leaving a job that they absolutely loved and everything was perfect. Right? There's this dissatisfaction that is brewing. Now, it may not be on the surface. You may not be telling anybody about it, but you wake up each morning thinking like, there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a better way to serve our customers. There's got to be a better way to preach the gospel. There's got to be a better way to whatever, right? And it shows up in 1,000 different ways, but we're almost consumed by this idea that there's got to be a better way. And so the dissatisfaction in us is not that we have a bad job or a bad boss, right? If you have a bad job or a bad boss, get a new boss or a new job, right? Like that's a much simpler solution than starting your own organization of any kind. And so founders, that feeling of dissatisfaction doesn't go away when their circumstances change. Right? They get the new boss and it's like, they're great, but there's still something in me that I can't get in this environment. And that's really what separates founders from the rest.
Andy Stanley has put it this way. He says, that's a person sitting in the crowd or sitting in a staff meeting going, I could do a better job than that, right? and we mostly have those, and I've been that person. It's funny you mentioned that. I have not applied for a job since I was 30 years old. That was almost 30 years ago. And I haven't had a current resume in 3 decades. Interesting profile for a founder, right? It's just you make your own jobs after a while. I'm curious, when you look at if there were 5 or so, 3 to 5 attributes, qualities, character traits that make up an entrepreneur. And I'm asking this question on behalf of those who are thinking, I don't know whether I got what it takes to start it, or I started something and I don't, because I've had friends too who have started things and then they've gone to work for other organizations. And some of them it was because it didn't work out. Others because honestly, they're just happier there. They were very successful on their own, but they're like, I think I'm better off as part of a larger organization. Yeah. So, if you look at what does it take for a founder to be a founder, what are the qualities or characteristics if you had to list 3 to 5?
Yeah, a few of them. So the first one is like that drive for vision, right? You see something that most people don't. It might feel like it's just 3 feet in front of you or 30,000 miles in front of you, right? But there's this sense of you're sitting in the room thinking, why don't they see it, right? Why don't they get it? That's a great hallmark for a founder. Another one is you walk into a room, right, with a bunch of people in an industry that you've never even heard of. And up on the whiteboard there's this big statement. It's a problem that the industry has been facing for 100 years, right? And you look at that board and you instantly and automatically have 5 ideas on how to fix it, right? It's just you don't even try. It's just there, right? Now, they might be terrible ideas. They might have tried all of them. They might be wonderful ideas. The fact is that they come automatically, right? And the reason why that's so important is, 1, you need space to exercise that gift. And entrepreneurism often provides that type of freedom. 2, you have to have that gift to get through the early days, because whatever your idea is for your business, it's not going to work. You're going to have to go through 2, 3, 5, 50 big pivots before you really find a viable business. And if you don't have that ability to see what it could be and to rapidly, come up with new ideas and solutions on how to get around the obstacles that you face, and enjoy that process, you're gonna fall short, right? And so those are two really, really big ones. And then I would say the third one is that dissatisfaction, which oftentimes comes from the other two.
Hmm.
But that dissatisfaction is really important because it is the fuel that will drive you to figure it out. One of the reasons a lot of new businesses fail is because it doesn't have to work. Right? I still have my regular job and I can go back to it. I'm still employable in another environment. And so when it gets really hard, the level of dissatisfaction with that option isn't high enough to keep us going. So those would be the three for me. Is you have to have a vision, right? You wonder why other people can't see it. You have the ability to come up with ideas seemingly effortlessly. And three, there's a frustration in you about being employed that maybe you can't even explain. That's okay. But it doesn't go away when you move from one job to another or one boss to another.
No, that's really good. Okay, so pattern recognition, 20,000 businesses, one way or the other that you've been involved in helping businesses, churches, etc. So you work with Les McEwen. We've had Les on the podcast numerous times. I absolutely love his work. What is the pattern you see among founders?
Yeah. So for those who know Les's work, and if you don't, check out some of the
Predictable Success. Huge book for me.
Phenomenal.
Yeah.
This will make a little bit more sense if you know what it is. But what Les did was laid out the stages that organizations go through. He really changed the way you think about an organization, not from what do we need to do, but when do we need to do it. Right? Mm-hmm. What creates success changes from stage to stage. And so he and I have worked together for 4 years now, something like that. I had an opportunity to work really closely with him. And I've walked organization after organization to predictable success. And one of the things that I found as kind of a practitioner, not just using this in my own business, which I did as well, but helping other business owners to achieve predictable success, is that the number one stumbling block for that is not any of the tips or tactics or tricks or things that we teach them how to do. It's not your team. It's not any of those things. It's the founder. It's that or the business owner in the case of succession, and it's that they are not willing to embrace the next stage of their own personal journey. And so in the same way that organizations pass through 7 distinct stages, founders pass through 7 stages as well, from pre-launch to post-exit or predictable success. For those who know about it, there are very definite and distinct stages that founders go through. And if we don't, one, recognize that stages are a thing, or two, we don't recognize what stage we're in, it's virtually impossible to know what we need to do individually right now to succeed. And number one symptom of this, right? And we'll see where it goes after that. But number one symptom of this is you're overworked, you're exhausted, right? You'd probably have quit attending the church that you lead if you weren't leading it.
If you weren't the pastor.
If you're sitting there and you have a successful organization and you're so overwhelmed by the pressure of all that success, it's probably because you don't recognize how the game has changed and how you need to change the way you show up as a founder.
All right. Can you walk us through the 7 stages, phases that founders, church planters, CEOs startup people tend to go through?
Yes. So, and I love it because it is equally true in both the nonprofit and for-profit space.
Yeah, it's just human nature, right?
Yeah,
it's like
the last two there's a different expression, and we'll get to that in a second, but all the way up through stage 5, it's 1-to-1. So it starts before you start. And actually the very first stage is that period of dissatisfaction. I call it the dissatisfied employee, right? Mm-hmm. And when you look at it, it's not just a correlation. That is the causation for founders. It's a necessary requisite. Now, you may not be an employee. You might be a dissatisfied college student. It's not that specific, but that dissatisfaction is the key piece. And what I liken it to in the book that I wrote on these different stages, we go back a step. One of the things that makes these stages so hard is that they're invisible. They're very real. They happen to everybody, but there's no visible proof that it changes. Let me give you an example where that's not true. So let's say the leadership journey of an employee, right? Just your average Joe. Their version of this is they're in college, right? They're not in the game yet. They're not working. They're learning how to play the game. They get a job. They're a frontline employee. Next stage of their evolution as a leader, as an employee, and they do a great job. What do we do with employees who do a great job? We promote them to be leaders. Team lead, project lead, and what happens? There are entire books and coaching practices and people who do nothing other than help employees make that one transition. Right? It's a very difficult transition to make from being responsible for yourself to being responsible for a group of other people while still having your own responsibilities. I call that going from star player to captain on the field. And the advantage that an employee has over a founder is that they got a new title in the process. Right? There's somebody else who said, hey, you now have a different role. Now you have to change your skill set to succeed in that role. When does that happen for founders, and who tells them that? Right? And so the problem with this journey, and why I wrote the book specifically for founders, even though it's the same journey that we all go through, is that for founders, it's invisible. That there's no clear delineation of each of these stages. So we've got to come up with another way of paying attention to this and seeing what these milestones are, what the transition points are. All that to set up the transition from stage 1 to stage 2 is actually the most visible of all of them. And that is going from that dissatisfied employee to stepping into the game, becoming what I call the startup entrepreneur, right? It's where we go full time in whatever it is. It's not a side hustle anymore. It has to pay the bills. That's when it gets real. That's when you enter the world of entrepreneurs. And like I mentioned earlier, it's about being the star player. So what it takes to succeed is being good at what you do, right? If you're a pastor, it's about selling the vision to your pre-launch team, right? To raising support and getting the resources that you need to start off right. If you're an entrepreneur, it might be the venture capital thing, but that's not most people. Most people, it's can you sell what you do, right? And specifically, can you sell what you do to people who don't already trust you? And it's very much about your own skills and abilities as an entrepreneur. If you can't get it done, it's not going to happen because it's just you. And so we tend to dial in and learn, hey, when I say this, they buy. When I say this, they don't buy. Once I sell something, now I have to go and do it. There's a whole challenge to that. But what happens when we're successful is more happens, right? We get more sales and we have to do more stuff and we're either selling or doing, and we get kind of stuck in this loop, and we realize, hey, I can't do this all by myself. I can't get this thing to scale all by myself. I need to have help. And so we go out and we start bringing in a couple of folks. And the first couple are relatively simple, right? It's like your niece to help with your social media, and your uncle who, does books for a Fortune 500 who can do your accounting for you. It's just that it's kind of whatever we hire by proximity. And not a whole lot changes. We've got a couple people that help us out. It's good. And it's still, if it's to be, it's up to me. And then I can hand off a few things here and there. There's no real fundamental shift.
So this is from stage 1 to 2, is it?
We're in stage 2 now, right?
Okay, got it.
And as we're hiring our first couple employees, it all happens in stage 2. There's not actually a shift for the first 1, 2, maybe 3, but somewhere around a handful.
And what do you call stage 1 and stage 2? I just want to be clear. So stage 1 is called?
Dissatisfied employee.
Okay. Stage 2 is called?
Startup entrepreneur.
Got it. Okay. And that could be solopreneur or me and a couple of people who are willing to help.
That's exactly you and your VA and a couple of contractors, you and a few part-time employees. But sometime you're in that stage 2, you're doing a great job. It's sometime after you hire a handful, right? That's my scientific advice here. When we switch from stage 2 to stage 3, happens around a handful of employees. What do I mean by that? It happens when you wake up one morning, right? It's usually a Monday or a Thursday. We wake up and the defining thought in our mind is, what's wrong with these people? Right? What is wrong with these people? Because when you have that many other people around you and you're responsible for getting them all moving in a helpful direction all the time, you find that you're spending less and less time doing your job and more time helping them do their job. And particularly in the for-profit world, you now have a payroll of 5 heads to cover, 5 families to feed. So you're having to sell more and you have less time to do that because you're having to manage all these people.
Mm-hmm.
And Carey, you tell me, I mean, you've talked to a lot of people, maybe you've met someone like this, but I have never met a founder who started their business with the dream of managing people.
Yes, it is the necessary evil that comes with the way we think of it, that comes with leading things, because a lot of people are artists or craftspeople, so to speak. In other words, what I really want to do is write. What I really want to do is preach. What I really want to do is cook meals if you open a restaurant. What I really want to do is fill in the blank. I love repairing cars, right? Or I love coding. So you're sort of the crafts person who wants to do it. You get overwhelmed, you hire people. All of a sudden, you're a leader.
Yeah. And you nailed it. And this is so true. And I actually really struggled with this stage for a long time because it's got a negative name. I'll tell you what it is here in just a second. But I didn't want to call it a negative name because who wants to like step up to the next level and it be the reluctant manager, right? Like that's not what we want. But that's what stage 3 is. That is stage 3.
Manager.
Stage 3 is the reluctant manager. And it's like being the captain on the field. And there's a couple things that make this really hard. One, most visionary founders are not wired to be managers, right? If they were, they would be an employee who's a manager somewhere else and crushing it. So it just does not align with the natural skill set of most founders. Second, because it didn't happen at the first employee or 2, we miss the fact that it happens at employee 5 to 10. So it doesn't feel like anything actually changed.
Right. It was helpful for a minute and now it's chaos. Mm-hmm.
Yes, exactly. So there's no real, why is this changing now? Why is it so hard now?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then the third part is the folks who make great employees, really anytime, but mostly at this stage, they don't think like you. They don't act like you. They don't take ownership like you. They don't make decisions like you, right? They don't solve problems like you. And you're thinking like what's wrong with these people? But the truth is, it would be 10 times worse if they did. Could you imagine a whole 10 of you trying to
10
run
visionaries?
around? Oh my goodness, it would be chaos. So because they're not like us, we have to learn the skill of managing people who aren't like us, of motivating people who aren't like us, but also filtering out the people who aren't like us, but aren't right for right now either. So just because not your employees aren't like you, I'm not saying that means that they should work for you, right? There's this tension that we have to wrestle between there's me, there's people who aren't like me but are really effective and what I need to learn to lead. And then there's the people I hired by proximity that should not be working for my company. But it's all just this big mess because you're in the game. You don't have time to sit down and figure out what all those categories are and what's different and who should be here and who shouldn't. If this was football, someone would be trying to take your head off every 11 seconds. It feels like that in entrepreneurism. So we have this reluctant manager stage that we all go through, and you have to learn to embrace it. If you want your organization to be more than what you could do as startup entrepreneur, then you have to embrace your role as a at least half decent manager. You don't need to love being a manager. You don't need to become the best manager, but you have to be skilled as one.
Is this a little bit, and I don't want to get too nerdy if people don't know Les's framework, but a little bit like moving from fun to whitewater, a little bit like that, not really?
We can go a step nerdier actually, and it is a small W whitewater that happens in fun. And so we just hit 9 levels of inception. This usually happens in kind of early mid fun for anyone who knows that model. And it's kind of a precursor to the significant challenge that's coming in whitewater ahead.
So it's basically, just to give people a quick primer on Les's framework, you sort of start up, there's early struggle, are you going to make it or not? And then at some point it gets fun. Your church is growing. You've got cash flow. You're not worried about closing the doors next Sunday. Your business is great. It might be in the low 6 figures. You're not a 7-figure CEO. Or maybe you are. Maybe you're making a lot of money, but you're doing it with a small team. And it just seems fun. It's great. Yeah. And you have a little bit of turbulence here and there, but it's a cool stage to be in. And they often become the good old days.
Yeah,
right?
They absolutely do become the good old days. And the reason why they become the good old days is usually when we learn, again, that basic skill set of leading other people, the right people, right? In Les's framework, they're the operators, right? We have to learn to lead operators.
Yeah.
And when you figure that out, when you crack the code on who actually should be working with me and the very few things that they need to succeed, a little bit of clarity, a lot of autonomy, and a vision to hold it all together, and boom, they're off to the races, you can have an absolute blast. It's super, super cool. It's a ton of fun. And you can run in that stage for a while, and you move from being that reluctant manager to being more, effectively a simple manager, right? It's just a simple management to give my team the space that they need, and it creates a ton of success. And you're thinking to yourself as you're going through this process, yes, right? I've finally figured it out. I'm not totally reluctant about all of this. I've embraced the little bit that I need. I've got the right people on the team. I'm ready for the next level. Maybe. So To describe this next level, I want to tell just a quick story. My wife and I, we have 3 kids. They're 13, 11, and 3 now. So about 3 years old. They were 10, 8, and 0. It was the early days of our youngest daughter. And there were not a whole lot of date nights during that season. Let's just put it that way. And so we're like, we've got to change this, right? And we got a babysitter who could handle all 3 of them, which was tough to do, but we found someone. And in the peak height of romantic getaways, we went and did dinner and a movie, right?
I remember those days. That was a big deal.
So we eat at some chain restaurant and go and watch. It was when Top Gun Maverick, so the second Top Gun, had come out, and it's just nice to get away, right? So we're sitting there, we're watching, and the movie's kind of rough. It's cool. There's all the flashbacks and the music, and I remember the old original Top Gear, and so that was cool. But it's as you watch the movie, just about everything that can go wrong for Tom does. I think he wrecks a plane at Mach 10 in the beginning. He tries to go for the girl and she rejects him. He's basically told he's being left behind by his employer. He's got to confront this lifelong challenge with Goose's son. It's just everything that can go wrong. And so I was feeling a little heavy, actually. I was like, wow, this is tough. And then we get the call from the babysitter with about 20 minutes of the movie left. And she's like, hey, you need to come home. Isabel, our daughter's not sleeping. The boys are fighting downstairs. I've gave it everything I can.
I'm out of tricks. Help me out here. Yeah.
And so everyone was safe and healthy and everything. There was no major issue, but we had to leave. So I didn't see the last 20 minutes of Top Gun Maverick for 2 years. And if you stop the movie right there, it's downright depressing, right? All those things. I think Tom has gotten shot down a couple of times. He's been chased by a helicopter. Everything that can go wrong does go wrong. And it's just the belly of the movie, right? The deepest, darkest moment. And unfortunately, that's what a lot of founders experience in stage 4. And stage 4, that comes after the reluctant manager, we're expecting to climb up and to the right. And our business or our church does, right? From a metric standpoint, it's growing.
Still
From
growing.
the outside,
Still
looking
progress.
in, magazines are writing articles about you, right? Like the local pastor's jealous of your success. You know, your family thinks like you have it all together, but you're thinking like, is this it? Carey, like folks are sitting there and like they've got everything to some extent. They've got everything that they've asked for, right?
Yeah.
They're looking around at
Be careful
all
about
the
getting
things
that.
that they've built, and they realize businesses get bigger, they don't get better, right? And it's the same thing is true for nonprofits. We start reaching these milestones, right? I'm going to have 500 members. I'm going to have 5,000 members. I'm going to hit $10 million in revenue. I'm going to hit $1 million in profit. It doesn't matter what the number is, but we set these kind of milestones and we think to ourselves, especially during the hard seasons ahead, when I get there, it's going to be okay. Right? When I cross that line, we'll have the resources that we need. When I have this team member, it's going to be all right. Or we kind of set it up and we put our joy on hold, thinking that it'll be easier to achieve in some future state. Right? Once we achieve that goal, we'll be okay. And systematically and invariably, those illusions of joy, the preponderance of joy waiting at some destination, start to get stripped away. And this is why so many founders talk about how it feels so lonely, right? And how it feels so isolating because your team's doing a great job. The organization's succeeding in so many ways. Everyone from the outside's looking, thinking like you've got it all together. It's all perfect. And you're just kind of dying inside. Right, like this is. I'm spending. I wanted to get into this to make coffee, and I'm looking all day, every day at P&Ls and legal statements, and it's just we're doing all these things, and none of them are checking the box. We're achieving these milestones, and they don't really seem to matter. Then, heaven forbid, but then some stuff starts to go wrong, right? The whitewater kicks in with the complexity of the organization starts causing people to have problems. Our leaders aren't keeping up with the pace of growth of the organization. We don't have the ability or time in the day to go and fight all the fires anymore. So not only are we being disappointed by how it feels to lead this organization, we feel totally out of control and unable to keep it going. And so now we're working, many times as hard to just preserve our ego and appearance of success as we are to actually succeed. And if we're honest, we probably don't even know what success is because what we thought it was, what we've achieved, isn't checking the box for us. And every founder who has enough success will get to this stage. Every founder will have to deal with this stage. And because it's so hard, and if you look at the trajectory, right? Stage 2, and then stage 3 was like a step down in a lot of ways, even though the organization was growing. And step 4 is another step down. We can start to draw the line through that, right? It's like, if you've never done this before, you're like, what is stage 5? It's like, I can't take any more of this. And this is where business owners will sell, right? Or step back and try. This is where we'll start talking about whether founders make great CEOs or whether I have what it takes to lead my organization. This is where we'll think about, it's just, hey, I remember those good old days. Let's just go back there when it was simpler, right? And there's actually, there's valid arguments to be made for all of those things, but they miss the primary point. The primary point is that everything that you've done through this far, everything that you've experienced so far has set the stage for the single biggest, most rewarding transformation you can make as a founder, right? What we've done when we make really big decisions in this stage 4 as a disillusioned leader, it's like Tom giving up 20 minutes before the end of Top Gun.
Yeah.
right? And he's just one step away from the victory that makes everything else worth it. And that's really, there's some hyperbole in that, don't get me wrong, but not much, right? When you make the shift from stage 4, the disillusioned leader, to what's coming in stage 5, which I call the chief executive, that transformation, that skill set, the way that that role actually aligns with who you are and how you're wired. Most folks can only last somewhere between 3 to 5, maybe 10 years at the most in stages 3 and 4 combined, right? It's just not sustainable for most
you're not going to be
founders.
Depressed every day. You're going to get out.
You're going to go one way or the other. You're going to go back, which is wonderful. Lots of people, it's absolutely the right answer. Or for some, you're going to go forward. Now, once you get to that chief executive role, if you do it right, the folks that I see in that role, they've been doing it for 15, 20, 25 years. And they're as alive today as they were 25 years ago.
Even with that entrepreneurial itch and wiring and everything, they're doing great.
Especially with it.
Tell me more.
We have a lot of false ideas on what being a CEO is, right? We think that it's this kind of stuffy suit and tie, like
quarterly
they've got to keep all the
calls.
trains. Yeah. And there's an element of that. There's some that you have to do that, but that's not really what it is. There are 2 things that a CEO does. The first one is casts a compelling vision for your team, right? That's what a CEO does. And give me a visionary who doesn't want to do that. Right? So that's the first one. And that's why I've found most founders are actually phenomenal CEOs once they know how to do it right. Because the primary requisite is, do you have a compelling vision for the future of your organization? If you don't, then yes, you need to find another CEO. But if you do, you might just have what it takes to make it happen. Second, you have to turn that vision into clarity for your team to execute. Right. So you have to be able to sit with them and map those 2 things together. And the third thing is you have to secure the resources that are necessary for them to fulfill that. That's really what it boils down to. Anything else is a stylistic decision. Do you want to stay on the platform and keep preaching? Great. Go for it, right? Do you want to just be responsible for, content creation and writing books or big ideas or, special projects? Great, go for it. There's wide boundaries on what a CEO can do to help move their organization forward, so long as they keep first thing first, which is, do you have a compelling vision for the future? Are you helping your team map that to clarity for execution? And have you given them the resources that they need to do that? That's what a great CEO does.
So in many ways, I don't want to read too far into it in case I've got it wrong, but you kind of get to choose, right? Like if you've handled those other things, it's like, actually, I do want to write a book, or I want to be teaching and contributing regularly, or I want to be in these meetings, not those. That kind of thing.
Now, I will say, and I'll agree with Les on this, that leading in predictable success, which is where you're going to get to by doing this, is a full-time job. Right. So it is, this is not like, I'll see you guys in 9 months kind of. That's not what I'm talking about. We're not there yet. We haven't figured that out. You wouldn't hire a CEO and then let them do that. Right.
No.
So it is a full-time job, but you have very wide boundaries on how you define that job. And it can be very individualized for the founder. And the things that you do that actually make the biggest impact, most founders are wired for. Right. It's a great fit. And there's some boundaries that come with this, right? We have to be skillful in it. One of the resources you have to give your team is autonomy, right? In decision making. And so it costs you something. I mean, don't get me wrong, like you have to give up control in a significant way.
And it gets lonely, even lonelier, because you're not in on the ground floor every decision, because the team is making decisions without you. And sometimes you look around and go, well, that's not how I would do it a lot of the time, right?
So lonely that the defining question of the stage, and this shocks people who haven't been there before, but every person I've told who's been in stage 5 says yes, is, who am I?
Can relate. Yeah, I think I've been
right?
There. Yeah, like who am I?
If I'm not the guy who saves the day all the time, right? If I'm not the face of every new thing that we're doing at our church, if I'm not fill in the blank, right? If I'm not the one who has all the ideas on how to solve our biggest problems, what value do I bring? Right? If I'm not my organization that I've built blood, sweat, and tears for the last 15, 20 years, who am I?
Or to put it theologically, if I'm not the Savior, who is? Oh, wait a minute. I think we know who the Savior is, but there's that Messiah complex, that rescuer. Somebody told me along the journey, if you're always fighting fires, be careful. You could be the arsonist. There's a really good point. 100%. And I've seen leaders do that too. But it does. I mean, I don't want to pretend that I've arrived or anything as a leader, but if you're really operating in your gift set, if you're really casting vision, aligning the team, it does get very lonely. I was explaining this to some leaders on a coaching call recently, and I remember when we got there as a church, or what I assume was probably stage 5 or predictable success, if you line those up, and people would say, oh, listen, I can't talk to you. You're so busy, or I won't email you. You're so busy. And inside I'm like, I'm actually not that busy. It's not, I'm preaching, I'm doing this stuff, but like the team's doing what they're supposed to do. It's that weird cognitive dissonance because you're so used to being needed. And even now, you're the last interview I do, I'm taking a month off. I doubt very much there's going to be one issue I have to deal with in those 30 days that my team can't handle. And that's wonderful, and it's freaky at the same time.
It's crazy. And here's the real test of that. Can you still do that when things are going wrong? Right? That's where it gets really tough.
That's a great question.
We're happy to give autonomy when things are going well, when they're making decisions close enough to what we would, when we're winning, or they make decisions and it works out. But are you willing to give them the autonomy to mess up? Right? I had someone on my podcast and she said something phenomenal. She said, sometimes you have to be willing to sacrifice a client for the sake of a leader. Right? Sometimes you will lose big material projects, opportunities, fill in the blank, because you have given your team enough space to mess up. Here's a simple, if someone's around this and they're like, how well am I doing? Here's a rule of thumb that I like to use. And that is that as CEO, you do not make policy decisions, you make people decisions. Right? You limit your ability to jump in and save the day to, my job is to make sure that I have the right people on my team and I'm holding my people accountable and I'm developing people for my team, right? You make people decisions, not policy decisions. And that's really tough for a founder who succeeded by making policy decisions, right? By making the call. It's a new skill set, but it's a phenomenally rewarding skill set.
Yeah, it's funny. This will be out at some point this fall, but I'm sitting down with Jim Collins soon. And that's one of the questions I want to ask him. He's beaten the drum over and over again about the right people on the bus. And I guess somewhere between stage 2 and 5, we've now got the right leaders in the right seats, right? Like we've got players in the senior roles. Is that sort of tantamount? Is that a prerequisite to being in stage 5?
Yeah, it's a huge part of it. So it's actually a huge part of progression through every stage, right? Okay. So each of the stages, who the right people are to help you lead the organization is different at each of these stages. So to get through stage 3, you need a right-hand man or woman, right? You need that kind of visionary operator combination, to use Les's language, or that number 1, number 2 combination to really succeed in stage 3. That structure of 2 people leading the whole thing starts to bottleneck and slow down. So in stage 4, the disillusioned leader, you are leading a leadership team, right? So you've got a team full of people now. And that's a big part of the challenge there. Now, once you step from stage 4 to stage 5, one of the hardest parts about that is moving from the leadership team that was helpful in stage 4, exactly what you needed, to the executive team that can make the policy decisions without you. Right? If you're going to move out of making policy decisions, you need to move away from the leadership team who did what you decided to the executive team who decides how to execute on the clarity that you provided.
So quality team-based decision-making.
100%.
Okay, great. So that's stage 5. What happens next?
Here's the really cool part about stage 5. If we just stop there, it'd be pretty awesome. But what stage 5 does is it totally flips the script on should the founder be the CEO or not to what does a great CEO have to do to lead this organization? Right? Because you've answered the question, who am I? Right? You have separated yourself from the organization. So you're not leading as founder anymore. You're leading as CEO. Well, what do you think the success rate is of hiring a CEO if you never knew how to be a CEO in the first place?
Yeah, pretty low.
It's not good, right? It's very bad, actually. What do you think the success rate is of if you have stepped into the CEO seat, you've proven it out over 3, 4, 5, 10, 15 years, and you've built a team around that CEO seat that can execute well? What do you think the success rate is of finding a new CEO to take over after you then?
I would say it's significantly higher.
Significantly higher. Now we can still screw it up. It's not a panacea.
Yeah, there's lots of
perfect
examples of bad CEOs that have come into great companies and kind of like, Now
so what stage 5 does is it sets us up to have the highest likelihood of success stepping into stage 6, which I call the true owner, right? Now, again, this is where nonprofit language is a little bit different, and stage 6 and 7 kind of blend in the nonprofit space. But let's just, for the sake of language and clarity, we'll use the business one. We can come back to the nonprofit one in a moment. You step into the true owner where you own and not run the organization. That means that you've got to get another CEO to run the organization for you, right? Now, like I said, that just because you are CEO and just because you know what that role is doesn't mean that you have a guarantee of success stepping into stage 6. There's one massive, massive mistake that I would still say many, many folks make, and that is that they don't hire another CEO. They hire another COO. Right? Or they promote their COO. And it might not be COO. It might be, associate pastor. It doesn't matter what the title is.
Yeah, the XP becomes a senior or something like that.
Here's the mistake that we make. The secret to succession is that you're not trying to find a successor to pursue your vision for your organization. You're trying to find a successor you trust to birth the new vision for the future of your organization. Right?
Yeah.
And that's where we tend to fall short.
Where is this going to go 10 years beyond me?
Yes. And that's where we really start thinking about legacy. And that's where we really start thinking about succession. And that's when we really start to build not only an organization that can thrive, but a vision that can thrive for years to come.
Yeah, makes sense.
And what that does, it does a couple of things. One, it's the highest likelihood of long-term success for the organization you built, right? If you care deeply, which the vast majority of founders do, if you care deeply about its success after you are gone, this is the highest likelihood of success you can create for it, right? Where it has a vibrant, life-giving visionary at the helm, leading an awesome team of executives, and the sky's the limit, right? It's beautiful. But it kind of leaves us with a question, well, now what do I do? I've handed this thing off. What do I do? And the second big way that founders mess this up is that they don't move to something else. All they do is try and graduate from their organization, but they don't have their own vision for what's next in their life.
This is such a trap for pastors, and we're living this out in real time every day. I talk to so many successors who's like, my founder's still around, or the longtime pastor's still around, meddling, causing problems, quiet criticism, et cetera, et cetera. Do you want to say more about that? Because I think this is huge. It's not just walking away from something, it's walking into something.
It is a prerequisite, right? And there's a lot of moving factors on this. Age and health and the organization. So I don't for a moment think that this is a simple thing. I'm not trying to simplify what is a really profound transition. But what I can say is, as the founding pastor, we'll use it that way, as the one who is stepping out of the organization, you have to ask yourself a couple of questions and really, really commit to them. And I would go so far as to say there's not a right answer to this, right? But there's a wrong implementation of it. So the first question is, what do you want the organization to be after you're gone? Right? Make it 50 years after you're gone. They don't, what do you want it to be? Really, honestly, genuinely, what do you want it to be? And the requirement there to answer that question properly is that you are gone, right? So it forces you to imagine what that will look like without you, right? And I would highly recommend that you don't do this alone, right? Find somebody else that you trust, someone who does this on a regular basis. There are people, it's their entire profession. It's a big part of what we do as scale architects, but find someone who you can trust to help you flesh that out. And
why is that your job as the founder?
It's not. It's not your job as the founder.
Why isn't it the next gen's job?
It's because you won't let go if you don't know what you want.
Fair.
Does that make sense?
Oh, so this is a vision for your life.
Well, it's both, right? You have to.
Okay.
So you have to say, "Hey, I want this organization to be thriving 50 years from when I'm gone," and they can't do it from a conversation I had with them 50 years ago. That's what it's going to take you to, right? So there has to be another way for them to thrive. And what is that? What's it going to be? When I'm looking for the person who's going to take over, what are the requisite traits that they need to have? Because they're going to have to set a vision because it can't just be me.
Got it.
So it has to be the founder because otherwise, if it's just the successor, now you have you have two competing visions. Right? And so you have to decide, hey, I want this thing to thrive and flourish long after I'm gone. And to do that, it needs vision, and it's going to need another visionary who can do that.
Right.
Take time with that decision. Don't rush it. Right? There's this pressure of like, oh, we have to do it. It has to be like 30 minutes and I've made the decision. Don't do that to yourself, right? Like this is a part of why it's great that being CEO is such a sustainable role because you need that time to answer some of these questions. So what I'm really trying to get at is not necessarily what the vision is for the organization, but what do you want for it? Right? You can do this for your kids, right? I don't want my kid to be me. I don't want them to have all my vision for them life. My vision for them is to flourish in their vision for their life.
Okay. So that's clear. Yeah. Anything else in stage 6?
So that's what we're looking for. The second one is to do that well in organization. This is different from, father to child, but is that you also have to have a vision for what's next for you. What are you going to sink your teeth into? Visionaries need something to go after. Not necessarily a goal, that's a little different, but a vision of accomplishing something. So it may be writing the book you've always wanted to write. It may be starting another organization. It might be actually focusing on your family, right? And loving your grandkids to pieces, right? It doesn't matter what it is. It just matters that it lights your candle, right? It has to fire you up because visionaries will always move toward a vision of something. And so if you never create that and you just go from the organization that you started and you still have you're just going to go back to that. It's like a fly to the blue light. You know what I mean? It's going to keep sucking you back. And in doing so, you're going to undermine your successor. You're going to frustrate the team and you're going to create a ton of problems along the way.
Well, yeah. And all your great days are behind you then, right? There's nothing exciting to get you out of bed. Do you have a slightly, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but Scott, do you have a slightly longer list? Because this is a problem when I'm talking to founders or long-term pastors. In the entrepreneurial world, I'll start another company. It's not always the healthiest or the wisest thing to start another church, particularly in your town. Bad idea. Don't do it. Maybe you haven't got another church in you. You don't think that's faithful. And then they're like, well, I've been in ministry for 30, 40 years. I have no other skills. I don't know what to do. So I love the idea of book writing. Love the idea of playing another role somewhere or of focusing on your family. But you're right. The visionaries, like this is my retirement project. I have not even 60, but I have no plans on retiring. I just enjoy this so much. And it's a parallel universe to the church I used to lead, still live here. but the paths don't cross. It's a very healthy relationship.
So that's very important, right? And I would say you have to reduce proximity, at least for a period. I'm not going to give a timeline, but you have to get out of that mix. Otherwise, it's just going to, like, the temptation to get sucked back in is too strong.
Well, you're not going to like it. Even if your successor is killing it.
Yeah. I mean, my company that I handed off to, they added like 20% the 2 years after I left, right? It's like, yes. Oh man, that hurts. It's like, because everything that they changed is kind of like, it says something about me and my leadership. You know what I mean? It's just, it's hard. But let me answer your question with what stage 7 is, because again, this is really what makes stage 6 worth it. Stage 6 is it's actually about learning to create space for another visionary. That's the skill set that you're building. Stage 6, being a true owner, is learning the skill set of creating space for another visionary to succeed.
Got it.
Really hard to do, but it's massively rewarding when you do, because guess what? There are thousands of visionaries in the next generation of leaders that need somebody to help show them the way. Right? And once you learn to lead one of them, right, and create space for that one to really lead in his or her own right, your ability to translate that to many of them goes through the roof. And so that's when you step into what I call stage 7, the visionary founder. You actually, to a sense, go back into founder mode in some ways, but you're not starting your own things. You are supporting other people's things, right? There's a Greek proverb that says, society grows great when old men plant trees under whose shade they'll never sit.
Wow.
And stage 7 is about building things, getting back into the game for the love of the game, building things that will never generate any direct result to you. That's not a requirement, but it's just the ethos of that, right? So you might get into, in the business world, venture capital and get your money is working for you. That's a side thing. I don't care if you make money on it or not, but you're not, stage 7, you're not getting into it for what you can get out. You're getting into it for what you can pour in. You're not writing your book so that you can, become, X, Y, and Z. You're writing your book because of the impact that it's going to make in future founders' lives or future fill in the blank, whoever it may be.
Yeah, and if it hits a list, all the better, but otherwise that wasn't the goal.
Right. It's not the motivating factor. Yeah. The other thing that you can do is, this is oftentimes an age thing or an energy thing is more helpful. You can go back to stage 2 in another environment, right? I did this. A lot of coaches do this, right? Where we say, hey, I've kind of done my thing. I want to go hang my shingle and do this, with a slightly different take, right?
Yeah, and it doesn't need to be big. We're not going to scale this. It's not going to become a corp. It's just going to be me doing a few things 4 days a week.
You can go rock stage 2 somewhere else, and maybe it gets a little bit of wind in its sails and it moves to stage 3, and you decide, hey, I've got another 5-10 years. Let's take this to stage 5 again. So you've already been down that path. Here's the cool thing about that is you'll go through these stages much faster the second time than the first time if you recognize those stages as they come. Right? Yeah. If you go back to stage 2 and be like, this is what works in stage 2. I've been here. I know I can do it. I'll do it again. This is what works in stage 3. I've been here. I can do it. I'm going to do it again. Those stages get much shorter, right? The success, they don't hurt nearly as bad. The success you achieve during those stages is much higher. It's a very rewarding process. Why? Because you did all the hard work leading up to it. Right?
Okay, this is great. If there's nothing else on stage 7, can you give us just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, just a quick recap of the 7 stages?
Yes. All right.
Even the names?
So we can go on and on about stage 7, but let's just do the names. So stage 1, dissatisfied employee. Stage 2, startup entrepreneur. Stage 3, reluctant manager. Stage 4, disillusioned leader. Stage 5, the chief executive. Stage 6, the true owner. And stage 7, visionary founder.
Cool. That gives a pathway for so many people in such a helpful way. And that's one of the reasons when I looked at your book, I'm like, oh, I want to have this conversation with you. So lot of people listening to this are the founder, the entrepreneur, the legacy pastor, the founding pastor, been there for a while, but a lot more probably are next gen. They're the next layer down or 2 layers down in the organization. And as they're listening to this, they see their boss stuck in one of these stages. So it's a reluctant manager, not a very good manager, maybe somebody who's not really ready to become a true owner. They're going to ride this thing into the sunset, die with their boots on. It's not good for the organization. The best days are behind the organization. What advice do you have for second or third chair leaders who see a boss that's sort of stuck in a stage for too long and would love to see a breakthrough on that, and for the sake of the organization and perhaps for their sake and the sake of their boss too?
Yeah. All right. First thing, someone told me this right as I got into coaching, and I wish I had known it earlier in my career, and that is that you can never be more desperate for the success of your client than they are. So if you're in an organization, you cannot be more desperate for your boss's growth than they are.
Yeah. They're not desperate for the growth. This is the problem, right?
So you have to put a ceiling on your desire for their improvement that is at or below theirs. That's really hard, but it's liberating, right? The reason why this is so hard for folks is because they keep trying to wait. They keep waiting for that ceiling to change, right? They keep trying to push it into something. And in doing so, they're just stuck in the kind of oscillation, the ambivalence that happens in that environment, or they're just downright antagonistic with the person that they're trying to change. You can't change anybody else. You can only change you. And when we come to that conclusion, it sets up a scary decision that we have to make, right? And this is why we won't make this decision. And that is, you might have to leave.
Yeah.
And it's okay. Right? It's not disloyal, right? It's not all it's not all of those things. You can leave and you can thrive in another environment. And probably to the extent that you've been super frustrated, just about everyone will benefit from that, right? So the first one is you just have to be okay or understand the circumstances in which it would be best for you to leave.
Sure. Fair.
Because what that does is it makes it your choice that you are still there. And that does something for our heads, right? It's not happening to us anymore. They're not limiting us anymore. I chose to be in this seat. And so what I'll tell people is, is there still more left for you to learn there? Are there still more experiences? Is this the best thing for you? The lid is what the lid is, right? Let's just imagine that's not going to change and hope that it does. But we have to operate as if this leader is not going to go anywhere. Is this still the best place for you? And sometimes that's a yes, right? I've counseled friends and clients through this, and they've said, you know what? It is. There's a lot of great things here, and I'm okay with that. There's a lot that I can learn. Other folks have said, no, and they'll go on to be founders of their own organizations, or they'll find another thing. That's okay. So once it's your choice, it takes the ability for us to complain away, right? And I remember I was stuck in this mode once with a leader, and I was just complaining about it to my dad. And he said, you either need to or get off the pot, right? Like you have to decide what you're going to do. And so for folks who are like that, you just have to decide, if they never changed, is this still the best place for you right now? If they never changed, right? Do you choose to stay here? So I want to say all of that first, because if you don't do anything else I'm about to talk about from that lens, you will create an antagonistic relationship with your leader. You want what's best for them in the organization, but you have to go through them to get it. And that's not a good place to be.
Sure.
So then let's say you stay, and we're in okay, let's hope for the best. What can we do to positively encourage them? One, you can share the book if you thought it was helpful. This podcast, share Carey's podcast, is phenomenal. The other thing is faith-based folks here, pray for them, right? Pray that the Lord would reveal it to them. And he will speak to them in his way and in their time, and in his time. Love them well. If you love them deeply and you express that love to them deeply, you will build a bigger bridge for truth. Right? And so you have to consistently commit to loving and supporting them even when they're wrong, right? You still love them through that. Pray for them. And then this gets really fun, right? So let's say you've committed to staying, you're loving them well, you're praying for them. Then you want to just have fun being as creative with you as you can, dropping as many hints as you can all over the place to hopefully see one day one of those ideas stick and the founder thinks it's their idea, right? That's what you do. From now on, all that frustration, you just turn it into fun by coming up with clever ways of just saying it differently, offering thoughts, sharing stories, and just have fun with it, right? Have fun being creative in ways of encouraging them to think differently. Man, that's an awesome place to be, Carey. If you've settled in your heart that you're okay, right? And they don't have to change for you to be okay, you are one of the most powerful people in the world.
I've got a buddy who's done that right now. That's the place he's in. He's not in ultimate control, very, successful executive, and that's his mindset. And he's generally happy. He wishes the CEO would make different changes, but that's fantastic. Wow, we covered a lot. Is there a final word? Anything else you want to share before we wrap up?
The last thing that I want to share is a funny story. So another one of my romantic fails. It was Mother's Day I can't remember exactly when this happened, but it was Mother's Day, and I decided I was going to make a big dinner. So I told my wife, go out. It was after church. Go out, have a blast. Come back. I'll have everything ready. I'll take care of the kids as well. And she's like, "Are you sure?" It's like we've got. We live life wide open at the Ritzheimer household. I was like, "Yes, I got it. Steaks, potatoes, the whole thing." Well, I'm a visionary. I'm not a planner, right? And so I didn't have half the things that I needed. 3 hours later, 3 trips to the grocery store where I'm pretty sure I paid 3 times what I should have for, everything. My wife comes home at the kind of dedicated time and it is chaos. My 2 boys are fighting over the TV remote. While they're fighting over the remote, some YouTube commercial for a horror movie comes on, right? I have no idea how the algorithm chose that for this moment. My wife walks in. My daughter doesn't have her clothes on because she was potty training. And the steaks are the whole grill is in flames, right? The potatoes are burning. It's just everything is wrong about this situation. And she I wish I was at my best at this moment, but I wasn't. So she's like, "What's going on?" And I'm like, it was not a pretty scene. Cooler heads prevail. We get the fires out. We get the TV off. And we decide we're just going to go out to eat, right? And fortunately, we actually had a wonderful meal. We went to there's this little steakhouse by our house. We went there. Everyone got what they wanted. And she leaned over to me, and she only gets to this because she's my wife, and she was right. But she's like, "I told you so." It's like, I was stepping out of my lane, right? I was trying to do all these things. I thought to be a great dad and a great husband, I had to be the chef and and I thought I had to be all the things. Thought I had to figure it all out myself. When in reality, I could easily have someone else help me with it. And when I got out of the way and let the professionals do their job, it created the space for me to be a great dad. To be a great CEO, you don't have to do all the things, right? You just have to get the right people around you, the professionals who do this day in and day out, to help set you up for success.
That's a great final word. Well, the book is short, so you will probably read it if you get it. It's called The Founder's Evolution. I really appreciated it. Scott, where can they find you and the book online these days?
Yeah. If you head to scalearchitects.com/CNLP, Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast, scalearchitects.com/CNLP. You can get a copy of the book for free. There's a digital copy there. Like you said, it was described as the authority of a textbook in the length of a comic. And so it's a nice, short and sweet book written for founders who don't have a whole lot of time for a whole bunch of stuff. It's going to do a couple of things. It's going to go through the stages, but there's two things that are really important. One, it's going to show you what to actually do in that stage. We didn't have time for like, what do you actually do? And so it's going to show you that. And in doing so, it actually tells you what you don't have to do. Once you know what you have to do, that means there's 20, 30 things you don't have to do. And several of the folks who read it and applied it came back to me and they're like, you would not believe it. I'm saving like 15 hours a week by just things I didn't have to do. I didn't realize I didn't have to do those anymore. So it take you, an hour maybe to read it and can save you 10 times that in the first week.
Okay, that's fantastic. So scalearchitects.com/CNLP. We'll link to that in the show notes. Scott, I want to thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Carey, thanks so much. It was my pleasure.